Sancha. So this is the only way that we could figure out on how to do our debate for the firearms. We tried multiple different methods and we couldn't get it to work, so we're going to stitch it together into an iMovie. And so our debate was about, should restrictions be placed on the Second Amendment? I said, no, I do not believe that restrictions should be placed on the Second Amendment because gun ownership deters crime. People can use guns for self-defense and criminals will find ways to get guns no matter what. So when assault rifles were banned, this had no effect on murder rates at the state level, and when states took away a person's right to carry a concealed weapon, there was an increase in gun-related murders. In the 20th century, when gun ownership doubled, the murder rate decreased significantly, and states with the largest increases in gun ownership also had the largest drops in violent crimes, according to data from my sources. States with concealed carry laws also had significantly less crime, down by a whopping 82%. My reason number 2 is criminals will find ways to get guns no matter what. In the year 2015, the number of guns in the United States surpassed the number of people. The majority of these guns were properly licensed and owned, but a large majority were also illegal firearms. These illegal firearms possessed by criminals are used to carry out attacks against innocent and defenseless citizens. Criminals will also criminals also will not care about gun-free zones if the government were to impose these laws. Fewer than 1 in 50, less than 2% of all prisoners had obtained their firearm from a retail source and possessed, carried, or used it during the offense that they were imprisoned for. In a national survey by the U.S. Department of Justice, they found that 287,400 prisoners had possessed a firearm during their offense. Among these citizens, more than half, 56%, had either stolen it, which was 6% of them, found it at the scene of the crime, 7%, obtained it off the street from an underground market, 43%, and most of the remainder, 25%, had obtained it from a family member or a friend or as a gift. 7% had purchased it under their own name from a licensed firearm dealer. They were also able to find that among prisoners who possessed a gun during their offense, 90% did not obtain it from a retail source. My reason number 3 is that guns can be used for self-defense. Every single year in America, guns are used over 80 times more often to protect lives than to take lives. In the United States, 270 million civilians own firearms, and every year, 200,000 women use firearms to protect from sexual assault or rape. 3/5 of felons admit they would not mess with an armed citizen, and despite having 88.8 people per 100 owning guns, we only have an average death rate of 4.8 citizens per 100,000 residents. Also, a closer look at the FBI crime statistics showed that the states that adopted concealed carry laws had an 8.5% decrease in murder, 5% decrease in rape, 7% decrease in aggravated assault, and 3% reduction in robberies. Yeah.
Okay, restrictions should be placed on the Second Amendment. Firstly, the Second Amendment needs to be updated. The prefatory clause reads, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state." This reference to the militia makes it unclear exactly what the framers had in mind. Those who support more gun restrictions argue that the Second Amendment was intended for militias. There should be general guidelines for government regulation of firearms that are consistent with an individual right to self-defense. More gun control laws would reduce gun deaths. 67.7% of all homicides between 1999 and 2016 were caused by guns, according to a March 10, 2016 Lancet study. Implementing federal universal background checks could reduce firearm deaths by a projected 56.9%. Background checks for ammunition purchases could reduce deaths by a projected 80.7%, and gun identification requirements could reduce deaths by a projected 82.5%. What these percentages say is that more restrictions, such as universal background checks and gun identification requirements, would greatly reduce gun deaths, which we need. 36,000 Americans are killed by guns each year, an average of 100 per day. The statistic shows how big of an issue firearms have become in our country. Restrictions should be placed on the Second Amendment to make it more difficult to obtain a firearm. The harder it is for someone to get their hands on a gun, the more gun-related deaths can be prevented.
So my first counter-argument was that a possible counter-argument is the Second Amendment needs to be updated because the prefatory clause reads, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state." That argument is very weak because a militia can be defined as a military force that is raised from the civil population to supplement a regular army in emergency. When gun technology advances, people are required to have more modern guns in order to act as a supplemental army in case of an emergency. And how would citizens be able to stop an invasion with a musket against an AR-15? Like, they wouldn't. Another counter argument that people might say is that more gun control control laws would reduce gun deaths. I think this is a stupid argument because it's proven false by many of the Democratic states that have harsh gun laws. For example, when Kyle Hoff decided to kill when he was at a late night party in Seattle last March, he had already broken a dozen gun laws and nothing would have prevented him from breaking a 13th. The Tacoma shooter broke the law the moment he brought a gun to school, and it is unlikely more gun control would have led him to choose differently. In fact, imposing more gun control is worse than ineffective because it makes it harder for citizens to defend themselves when police are not on hand to protect them. Research shows that guns are used thousands of times each year to prevent crimes. So, in conclusion, I believe that restrictions should not be placed on guns because there are too many conflicting points from both sides. Americans should stick to their core values and beliefs in order to protect this country and anyone who lives in it. Guns do not kill people, people kill people, so at the end of the day, you cannot blame an inanimate object for the death of thousands out of billions of people in the world. Guns do way more harm do way more good than harm, and they help to protect people. It's only the evil people who choose to use guns for the pleasure of killing others. Thank you for listening to our debate, and sorry it took so long to turn in.
A common argument against stricter gun laws is that individuals should have the right to own a firearm in order to defend themselves, but guns are rarely used in self-defense. Of the 29,618,300 violent crimes committed between 2007 and 2011, 0.79% of victims, about 235,700, protected themselves with a threat of use or use of a firearm. Furthermore, the restrictions that should be placed on guns would be in an effort to prevent those who aren't using it in a proper manner from obtaining one, not those whose goal is to protect themselves. Another argument against gun restrictions is that gun control laws such as background checks and microstamping are an invasion of privacy, but most adults and gun owners support background checks. According to a February 20th, 2018 poll, 97% of American voters and 97% of gun owners support universal background checks. Everyone has a right to their privacy, but these are precautions that should be taken in order to keep the citizens of this country safe. In conclusion, there should be restrictions placed on the Second Amendment in order to promote safety. If we start enforcing gun control laws, we could prevent some of the horrific hate crimes and mass shootings that we see in our world today. Safety for all individuals of our country outweighs a lot of the counter-arguments that are shown to fight against stricter gun laws. 36,000 Americans are killed by guns each year. This is something that needs to change and be prevented.